All right, I think we're going to get started. So welcome everyone to today's session on addressing technical debt. My name is David Mainville. I'll be the host for today's session. Today's session is being recorded, and I will be sending out an email later in the day with a link to both the slides as well as the recording of today's session. Joining me today is my partner in crime, Carl Beach. Why don't you say, introduce yourself, Carl?
Happy holidays, everybody. I'm one of the fellow co-founders, and I'll just kind of be moderating the chat today for David.
And that's a really good point. If you have any questions during today's session, feel free to put them into the chat. Carl's going to be moderating that, and at the appropriate time, he'll interject with your questions. So we're going to try and keep it as interactive as possible as we go through today's presentation. Let's see here. Anything else? So use the Q&A or chat feature for the questions, and we're going to email you a copy of the slides later in the day. For those of you who are not familiar with our company, we're Navia. We've been in business for like 24 years. And when we started our company, we were actually a consulting company, and we did a lot of work in the business process management space. So we helped organizations identify their processes, map their processes, document their processes, and more importantly, we did a lot of work in helping them implement those processes using good process and technical requirements. And that really ties in today's discussion about technical debt, because we believe, at least from our experience, there's a very tight correlation between having a successful implementation of a software product and having good base requirements in both the form of a process as well as business and technical requirements. So anyway, we started the company, back 24 years ago or so, and we did a lot of work in that space. And during that time, we developed a tool for our internal use, and that tool has evolved into Navia. So Navia is a process tool that's used to design, document, and share your processes within the organization. It also can be used to assess the maturity and capability of your processes for continual improvement and for governance purposes. So if you're interested in learning more about Navia, feel free to go up to our website, navia.com, and you can learn all about the product. So without any further ado, let's get into the presentation. So technical debt. So I like to say that technical debt is like quickly cleaning a room by shoving everything in the closet. It's going to come back to haunt you. So there's really, a big issue with technical debt, especially in SaaS implementations. Carl, you can interject if you will, but we've seen this a lot as, in our company, dealing with many people working with a variety of SaaS type systems, where technical debt is really causing issues with the client, issues in moving forward, issues in innovation. And this technical debt, if you just shove it in the closet and forget about it, it will come back to haunt you. So one of the things I want to do before we get actually into the meat of the presentation, I'd like to just do a little poll of the audience here, and with a simple question: does technical debt impact your team's ability to innovate and deliver projects on time? So let me go in here and launch the poll. So you should be seeing a poll on the screen. So if you can just take 5 seconds and go in there and just provide your input on that. So the poll is launched. And I'll just wait maybe 5-10 more seconds to let some more votes come in. So we got about 20%, about 40%, getting close to half the people. I'll see if I can get to about half the people before I look at the results. All right, 5 more seconds. 3, 2, 1. I'm going to close the poll and add it to the stage. So basically, from the number of people who responded to the poll, 50% of the people have said that it impacts their ability to innovate, and while 38% said some impact but manageable. And then there's a couple of people that I believe don't maybe not sure how it impacts them. But we'll get into the topic here today, and we'll see if this helps you understand the topic a little bit better. So let me remove that from the stage. Let me go back to my presentation. So you should be seeing the presentation. All right. So let's start by defining what technical debt is. So technical debt, also known as code debt or design debt, is a term that describes the cost of rework or maintenance that arises from choosing an expedient solution over a more robust, well-designed approach in software development. Now this cost, and there's many reasons this can happen, but the cost is often incurred to meet deadlines or expedite delivery. And it can have a long-term set of consequences, such as impacting the maintainability and scalability of the software. Now, this term was first coined by Ward Cunningham back in 1992 at a conference where he likened it to financial debt that's incurred when you choose an expedient solution that needs to be refactored later. Refactoring meaning having to go back and rework the code. Ward has a little bit of experience in the industry. He's actually the inventor of the wiki and a co-author of the Agile Manifesto. So there are different types of technical debt. And feel free, if you have any comments you want to add, feel free to jump in. Let's go back to the comment screen over here. There are different types of technical debt. The first one is intentional. So sometimes you don't have a choice, right? You know, you need to, you realize you're putting something in the system that might have to be refactored later, but you're doing it for business reasons, you know, to meet a deadline, to get a project closed, to get a new product launched. So intentional debt, at least you're going in with your eyes wide open. Then there's unintentional debt. That's a result of mistakes, poor practices, or a lack of foresight. So this, you know, you never really meant to put this into the system, but the fact that you may not have had good practices is what caused the technical debt to incur. Then there's requirement debt, and this is one that, you know, Carl and I really resonate with. It occurs when the development commences without a clear set of requirements, usually to save time, and this can result in all sorts of issues, right? If you don't have requirements, or the requirements are fuzzy, the developers will interpret those clients and perhaps not implement something that really meets, or it doesn't match the business objective that you were trying to solve with either implementing a SaaS program or doing development from scratch. So requirement debt, I think, is one of the major causes, personally, of technical debt. Then there's code debt. So poor quality code, code smells meaning things like lots of duplicated pieces of code. So if you have, rather than having a library or a class that you create and calling it multiple times, you create multiple copies of the code. That increases code complexity and also opens up the opportunity for someone to miss. If you're updating that code, now you have to update it in 3 places instead of 1. So code smells are just the indications that your code is not built properly. There's also a lack of adherence to coding standards, which could result in technical debt. Then we have the next two, and they're kind of related: design debt and architectural debt. So design debt with the software, and architecturally how this software is meant to scale. So if you haven't put a lot of thought into how this software might grow over time, you might have built something that just really can't scale properly. Maybe it's not able to benefit from extra server power because it can't, that has not been designed to go on multiple processors. So the architectural debt and the design debt can actually limit. So it goes back to requirements, right? Having the good requirements, and requirements aren't only business requirements, but it's requirements around the design and the architecture. Another big cause of technical debt is testing. So if you have insufficient or ineffective testing, this could lead to bugs and regressions. So you have something called test coverage. So if you're not covering the whole application with your testing, If maybe your testing is too manual, you're not adopting automatic testing techniques, or the coverage of your testing is insufficient, this could lead to bugs and regressions, which accumulate as technical debt. Something here that a lot of people might not realize, but documentation debt. A lack of or outdated documentation, making it very difficult for new developers to understand and maintain the code. Over time, people come, they go, and if the system isn't adequately documented, it could really, cause difficulties for maintaining that system as you go forward. There's, of course, infrastructure debt. So that's outdated or inadequate infrastructure, such as servers and network equipment. And finally, it's what I call process debt. And in this context, I mean process in terms of the IT service management processes like the software development process, change process, release management processes, your testing processes, all of those things that you should have in place as part of a good IT infrastructure. If they're not robust, this could introduce process debt into or technical debt into the application. Any questions or comments at this point, Carl?
Nothing so far.
Okay.
No comments yet.
And like I said, if you guys want to just jump in, if you want to just share something that maybe you've experienced, be happy to entertain that. So just go ahead and put it in the chat, and Carl will be monitoring that. So a lot of times when you think of technical debt, you really think about it in terms of software development, right? So building an application from scratch, but it also applies to enterprise level SaaS applications, things like Salesforce, ServiceNow, Workday. These products as well can incur technical debt. And some of the causes of technical debt in SaaS is, number one, taking shortcuts. And a lot of times that's, goes back to the core definition of technical debt. Expediency and haste makes waste. So taking shortcuts can often result in technical debt. Inadequate process and technical requirements. Once again, we're going to do a little case study a little bit later and talk about some of this. So you'll see how inadequate process and technical requirements can result in technical debt. A lack of governance and standards. And that sort of ties into the next bullet point, citizen development. These SaaS applications are very powerful. They're often called low code or no code applications. And one of the advantages of some of these tools is you can allow, business people to go in and create applications within the framework, or to do customization, not customizations, but to modify or to maintain those applications. And that combination of lack of governance and standards combined with citizen development and perhaps inexperienced developers can really result in technical debt. We'll talk more about citizen development later in the presentation. But again, there's a certain level of experience that's required to maintain enterprise level applications. And if you don't have the right resources allocated to maintaining your systems, you can incur technical debt. And one of the main ones, and this was particularly in older implementations of these SaaS applications, is that you have early adopters. And because they adopted the tools early, they might have adopted it when certain core functionality was not available within the application. So, I'm laughing here because I remember a specific example of someone building a change management module using a release module of a system. And by doing that, hindered their ability to move forward. So excessive customizations, particularly in older implementations where features were primarily created through these customizations, can put you in a situation where you can't upgrade to the next version of the SaaS application. And what that does is it hinders your ability to innovate. Maybe you want to implement some new whiz-bang feature of the platform. Maybe there's an AI component, or maybe there's something else you want to implement. Maybe there's a governance risk compliance module you want to implement. Because you've done something at a customization level, you're not able to take advantage of those new features until you unwind all of that technical debt. So there's different ways you can identify whether you have technical debt in your environment. There's code analysis, and typically code analysis is done through tools. So, for example, SonarQube is a tool that we use in development, which will go and look for code smells. We'll look for, if you have vulnerabilities in the code, it'll go against if you guys are familiar with something called OWASP, it's the top list of vulnerabilities. So it'll go against the OWASP list and see if you've injected any kind of vulnerability into the product. It'll look for complexity of code. It'll look for, just different things within the code. So tools can be a very, very powerful part of identifying whether you have technical debt in your environment. Another way is just through team insights. And code reviews is a big part of that. So just having the team, through code reviews or retrospectives or just plain old developer feedback, identify those pain points that might have been missed by the automated tools. Peer-to-peer code reviews, if someone's developing a piece of code and their peers are looking at it, they could identify that potential for technical debt much earlier in the process than having to wait until you release it out to the general public. And then there's the business context. So are you being impacted in your ability to deliver services to your internal or external clients because of technical debt? Have you gone to the IT organization and said, we need to do this, and they come back and say, well, we can't because we're on an old version of XYZ? So the business context is another way of looking at as to whether or not you have technical debt in the environment. So code analysis, through different automated tools along with testing tools, team insights by having retrospectives, code reviews, developer feedback, and the business context by just looking at how are we being impacted in our ability to deliver services to our customers. So the top causes of technical debt, and this would be a good place if anyone has anything they'd like to share with the rest of the people on the call here today. But this is from our perspective, what the top causes of technical debt are. But from our experience, and Carl and I have been doing this for a number of years, some of the top causes of technical debt is schedule pressure. So schedule pressure, the go live of an application could cause intentional debt through expediency, and it can cause unintentional debt where suboptimal solutions were implemented because of the time pressure, or poor coding practices were used, or there was insufficient testing to meet the deadline. So schedule pressure is a big contributor to technical debt. The second is the lack of knowledge, and this is from two perspectives. There's the domain knowledge. So if you're putting in a system that's going to support a specific area of the business, you need the business domain expertise so that you have proper requirements going forward. But there can also be insufficient understanding of the system or technologies. If you're new with a SaaS application, let's say you brought in product XYZ, you might send some of your people off for training. They come back, they're all excited to jump in and get the job done. But some of these applications are actually more complex than they might seem on the surface. They're touted as being low code, no code, but then there tends to be a lot of things that need, that's very specific to the platform that, if you don't have the right experience, can result in poor design decisions and affect the implementation. So lack of knowledge is another. And I think the other big area that causes technical debt is fuzzy requirements. So vague, ambiguous, changing requirements, you're constantly changing what you want to do, can really increase technical debt by forcing developers to make assumptions, leading to inconsistencies and future rework. What have some of you folks seen in terms of your organizations? I'd love to hear some of that if you be willing to share.
Yeah, you can just put that into the chat.
Got a quiet group here today. All right. Let's move on to the next slide. So how do you go about measuring technical debt? There's there's a lot of metrics. So I just picked 5 here for today's presentation, but there's a lot of metrics that you can use as part of a formal process to measuring technical debt. This includes the technical debt ratio. So that's the cost of remediating technical debt relative to the overall cost of developing or maintaining the software. So if you have an investment in either a SaaS platform or an application you're building from scratch, how much of the time or how much of that budget is spent on dealing with technical debt, doing rework, doing remediation versus innovating and moving the platform forward. Then you have code quality. So that's looking at the health and maintainability of the code and factors in such things as complexity of the code, coding standards, and the documentation. There's defect density. So that's the number of defects per unit of code. So, you can measure the unit of code any way you want, but the number of defects per unit of code is another indication of the amount of technical debt that you have in the system. Bug rates. So tracking the frequency of bugs and defects over time. And this can indicate code quality and potential technical debt accumulation. So if the amount of bugs continue to increase versus being solved, you're just incurring additional interest, if you will, on technical debt. And there's also code churn, which talks about the frequency of code changes, indicating that you have a code base with high instability or frequent alterations. And that could also be a significant indicator that you have technical debt. So we have a couple of, so Tracy has a comment here. With ServiceNow, another source of technical debt could be that the tool was OG implemented, so originally implemented, didn't have the capability, and then was developed later. Yeah, that was a point. Yeah, we did bring that point up earlier. You're exactly right. A lot of technical debt's incurred because the product might have lacked a feature, and you basically had to customize something in the tool to create that feature. And then now you're stuck having to unwind that when the new version of the application comes up that might have that feature included. So that's great, Tracy. Thank you for sharing that. And Matt's saying you can't boil the ocean, so sometimes you have to prioritize your efforts. And that's true. Sometimes you have to prioritize your efforts, but that's all part of the requirements, right? And which allows you to understand what you're able to do and what you're not able to do. And I love that comment, boiling the ocean, because sometimes people will come along and they're adding requirements at the last minute. And like you said, Matt, you can't boil the ocean. So you have to be able to say no and cut things off and have a good plan of maybe there's going to be a phase 2 or a phase 3 release where you can address some of those additional requirements.
David, there's one more above Tracy's, which plays into what you just said, scope creep.
Oh, sorry, Christina, I didn't see that. Yes, thank you. That's another one where, and basically just what I said, scope creep, where people are changing or adding requirements, especially at the last minute. So what are some of the consequences of technical debt? Well, it's definitely going to increase your costs. So accumulated technical debt leads to higher remediation and maintenance expenses, and that diverts funds away from innovation. And it's much better to have your requirements set and build something that meets the needs of the client and move forward with evolving requirements rather than have to always go back and fix bugs or unwind technical debt. It also affects maintainability of the code, right? The complexity in the code base hinders modifications and upgrades, and it slows down development and increases the risk of bugs. We also have reduced agility. Technical debt limits the ability to quickly respond to business needs, delaying feature releases and causing missed opportunities. So that decision to do things with some haste at the beginning can act, because I want to meet my target, I want to meet the go live date, can actually, come back like shoving stuff in your closet when you're trying to clean up the room. It can come back to haunt you because it's going to, it might impact your ability to be more agile going forward. Strained resources. So addressing technical debt monopolizes IT and development time, which can lead to frustration, burnout, and decreased productivity. Customer satisfaction, so bugs and performance issues will degrade the user experience, eroding trust and threatening customer retention. And security is always high on everyone's list these days. And older technologies might not be getting the security updates that are needed. So it could exacerbate the risk of breaches or compliance failures by not staying current with the technology. So I mentioned earlier that I'd like to talk a little bit about the citizen developer, and there's positives and negatives with everything, right? So in this case, what are some of the benefits of the citizen developer? Well, there can be cost savings because you can leverage current employees to build apps, reducing reliance on costly external developers, perhaps, which can cut expenses. So there's some potential cost savings. There's rapid delivery. By having citizen developers, if I needed to get some feature or some functionality, I can just do it, right? And you can rapidly deliver it, launch it, and meet the business needs much quicker. There's an opportunity for increased innovation, because when you use citizen developers, they're coming from a variety of perspectives. This person might work in HR, right? They know the HR process cold. Or you might have somebody in finance. They know their processes inside out. And by having citizen developers, you get that business domain expertise that can really help increase the innovation. And also, when people come from things with different perspectives, you probably would end up getting a better solution in the end. That kind of ties in with the next point, which is collaboration. The citizen developers, can really connect, technical and non-technical teams for better project success and improved business alignment. Citizen developers possess a deep understanding of the specific needs and challenges of the departments and their processes. So Armin's saying, I saw CD create a chaos. Nothing was documented and person left. Well, that's a great segue, Armin. Let's go into some of the challenges. And actually, my first one says technical debt, but I think they all kind of are related to technical debt. So there's the technical debt itself, okay? The citizen developer might create inefficient and hard to maintain applications, increasing technical debt and stifling innovation and scalability. Security and data concerns. So these citizen developers might not have enough experience on how to deal with security, privacy risks. They make one mistake and they're exposing at some part of the application personally identifiable information, for example, just not aware of the things they should be doing, potentially exposing sensitive data to breaches, misuse, or just sharing it with the wrong people. So security and data concerns. There's governance issues. So especially if you're not managing your team of citizen developers, you can end up getting inconsistent app quality and integration. Well, say, are they even thinking about how this might need to scale and integrate, which can create a whole set of challenges upon itself. There's the scalability and maintenance issues. As Armin was saying, these apps often aren't built for growth. They can become bottlenecks. They require a substantial resource to update or replace. And if the person who built it left and they didn't document it, and people are relying on it, it's almost like too much citizen development is trying to run your business on a bunch of spreadsheets. So you got all these little apps, but they haven't been architected to work together. They haven't, they're just not designed. You're not really leveraging the platform in the way it was meant to be leveraged. And then the shadow IT, where these low code platforms can lead to unsanctioned app development. And without IT's involvement can cause different integration and security issues. So there's a whole host of challenges and there's benefits. It's not to say you can't have a good citizen developer program. As a matter of fact, I recently was on the PMI, Project Management Institute's website, and they have a whole program around citizen developers. And one of the big things I learned, from the PMI aspect is it's that governance and making sure the citizen developers are working under a common set of principles So there is some oversight of the citizen developers. So some of these mistakes aren't made. Satoshi is saying another source of technical debt is a lack of understanding of the capabilities and best practices of the platform, which leads to customizations instead of configuration. That's an excellent point. Thank you for sharing that. These, and it goes back, especially if you're new to the platform, right? So if let's say you were on, I'm not trying to pick on any product here, but let's say you're on Remedy for years and then you moved over to ServiceNow, and you don't have the domain experience in ServiceNow, or vice versa, you move from ServiceNow to another platform, you might not be aware of what that platform is capable of. And instead of using its inherent capabilities, you have these workarounds or these customizations, which again can lead to technical debt. So I said we're going to have a little case study here. So I'm hoping everybody will get a little engaged with this. It's actually, the points I'm raising here is from something Carl and I both experienced. Basically, so this is a real life case study. We're not going to have, trying to do it over a meeting like this is sometimes a little difficult, but I'll present the case, and I just like to hear what you guys can think some of the issues might be. So let's get to that. So we have a multinational financial services organization. So, they work in many countries, very large, very, very demanding environment. The industry they're in obviously has many regulatory and compliance controls, so they have to stay current with all of that. Many legacy applications. So in addition to what they're about to develop, they have all these legacy applications that are an important part of the business, right? They don't change overnight. Now they're going ahead and replacing an ITSM change management system. They hired a third-party implementation partner on a tight deadline. And one of the things that drove that tight deadline was they want an out-of-the-box implementation, right? So management was told that, go out of the box, you're going to be able to implement this very quickly, and you're going to be able to get it implemented, in a rapid manner and get everything you need. Also, process design sessions, they dedicated a half day to the process design sessions per process. So what could go wrong? So why don't we, so I'm going to put the slide back up. So given this environment, what do you think some of the things that can go wrong with an implementation like this? And while we're letting you guys think about that, Paul came in and commented saying there needs to be more accessible education about core configuration capabilities. People will find a way to get what they want, either the way it was designed by the builder or create a workaround to do the same thing. Thanks for sharing that, Paul. So let's take a look at this case study. I'd love to hear what you folks have to say about that. Multinational financial services company. So as anyone who's worked in that sector knows how controlled it is, the regulatory and compliance requirements that go around that. Many legacy applications, so they have to integrate this with that, and there's a lot of that in place. They're replacing a change management system, so that's an important part, especially for things like Sarbanes-Oxley controls. Having good change management is critical to financial services. Third-party implementation partner on a tight deadline, and management is saying out of the box, out of the box, out of the box. So I got a couple. Here we go. A couple.
Yeah, we got a few comments in there. Yep.
Yeah, not all requirements will be discovered. Not enough time to design processes. Think about the legacy applications. You might not realize that something from the old change management system might have triggered a file transfer to another legacy application or a data transfer. If you don't understand the process end to end, you might miss those integration points with the legacy application. The legacy applications often have features that are not able to integrate with the new tools. So that would require additional development to build APIs or interfaces. Thank you, Christina. Armin, not all requirements discovered, not enough time. Terry says different financial requirements for different countries. Right. So these, when you, especially you're talking the process and requirements gathering, it's complex for an organization. It's a lot different than trying to implement, you're going into a university, for example, and implementing ServiceNow versus going into an organization like this, two different things. The tight deadlines could be extended due to bugs during testing, for example. Yep, definitely. Thank you, Christina. Hey, John, change management touches everything, so there could be scope creep. Yeah, that's for sure, because if you think about it, especially in this environment, like I mentioned, the Sarbanes-Oxley, those of you might not be aware, but there's very, very tight controls on IT changes into the environment in financial services. So yes, if you haven't caught all those touch points, scope creep is definitely a concern. Satoshi is saying lack of organizational change management to identify impacts and mapping as is to the 2B way. Yeah, you're not going to do that. Could you imagine? Here's a company who spans multiple countries, and you're going to spend half a day trying to understand what their change management process is. I think probably companies like this have a change board that manages many tabs throughout the organization. You're not designing a process in half a day or implementing that out of the box in any tool. There's going to be configuration of the workflow for sure, and of the application. Changes. Yeah. Oh, Armin, good point. And Armin comes from things as a consultant. Changes are very critical in finance. He is just sharing that his organization spent months on change management. A lot of stakeholders for sure. What's the strategy and outcomes? It's more than just implementing out of the box. There's no such thing as out of the box for finance. And it's funny because this organization truly, and I think Carl's dropped there for now.
I'm here. My screen's out. That's all.
Oh, your screen's out.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we were both shocked when we saw this, right? That was what they were allocating to the process design work. And we told them hey, there's no way you're going to understand the process in half a day. It's just impossible. I mean, you're going to need multiple workshops with multiple groups just to understand how change management impacts every corner. But, sometimes, people have this, they've been sold that this wouldn't work out of the box, and, they just got this in their mind. Yeah, yeah, Christina, it was mind boggling. Anyway, so I just summarized a few of the points here. Compliance requirements, they end up becoming an afterthought, leading to technical debt. Inadequate process understanding leads to misalignment between business and processes and systems, capabilities, missed requirements. What does out of the box mean? Does out of the box solution meet all the complex requirements of a large organization? Many potential regulatory compliance and integration requirements. The time constraints can result in a rushed implementation. Did the third-party developer even have domain expertise in the finance sector? The overdependence on a third party might lead to communication challenges or a lack of industry-specific expertise. So for sure, there's a lot of things here that can impact and actually cause you to incur a lot of technical debt. So this is sort of leading in. So we talked a little bit about defining what technical debt is. We looked at the different types of technical debt, like there's intentional technical debt, unintentional technical debt, requirements debt, et cetera. We looked at some of those decisions, some of the main causes, like, trying to implement things, quickly and not spending enough time, or maybe not having the right domain knowledge or expertise, how citizen development plays into technical debt. But let's take a look at, how we move forward. So I want to talk a little bit about the role of process and requirements management. So, anyone on the call here ever renovate a house? You buy an old house, they're beautiful, nice brownstone house in the city. You go down in the basement and you realize, and the first thing you try to do, it's got knob and tube wiring, or it doesn't have drywall, it has plaster, and you make a hole in the plaster and the whole thing starts crumbling around you. And then you dig a little bit deeper and you find out, there's issues with plumbing. So it's really hard to renovate an old house without a really good blueprint, because there might be a whole bunch of technical debt in that house in the way of, substandard wiring, plumbing issues. I'm sure people have experienced this sort of thing. Also, moving forward, it's very hard to build a house without a good blueprint. You want to make sure, the walls line up and you've got the right size windows and all of those things. I'm not a tradesperson, but you could just imagine trying to build, even something as simple as a house or something as complex, as the Freedom Tower in New York City, without the right blueprint, you can end up with a lot of trouble. And I look at business process and technical requirements being the blueprint for any software implementation, whether that's implementing a SaaS product or implementing a software, building a software product from scratch, designing something and rolling it out. You need to understand what's the business problem you're trying to solve, and that's the business process. And then that business process, has to be translated to business requirements and ultimately to technical requirements that connect the business process to the actual implementation. So it's very critical to have a blueprint. And the better your blueprint is, and the more often you maintain that blueprint and make sure the blueprint is updated, is critical to managing technical debt. If you never come back to this original design and you've moved 5 years into the future, you'll find that where you are has nothing, there's no basis in reality with the original blueprint. So maintaining that is also very important. So one of the things that can help you manage this is following business process management principles. Now, it's funny, there's given the nature of our client base and the people who typically come to our webinars, there's probably a lot of folks on the call here today, who work with ITSM tools and that sort of thing. And it's funny, we spend a lot of time implementing tools to support ITSM processes, but quite often we don't have the ITSM processes to support the tools that we actually roll out. And in business process management, there's a cycle or there's a set of steps that you're supposed to follow to maintain your business processes. So first of all, you need to identify what they are, right? What's the scope of this process? So change management, what's the scope? What are the key activities? Who are all the different players in the process? What's the desired outcome? So unless you know going in what it is, what you have and what you're trying to transform and what you want to solve, you're going to have a very difficult time, having the tool aligned to that. You just don't have any knowledge. And once you understand the scope, the activities, the actors, the desired outcomes, it's really important to create a process map that documents the end-to-end workflow. So identify a change, assess a change, schedule a change, make sure the change has gone through the appropriate testing and implementation, and then close out the change and do a feedback loop to make sure the change went like it was supposed to go. So it's important to map out that process, because it's going to be hard to create the workflow in the tool if you don't have that in place. It's also, when it comes to automating it, the automation comes after identifying and mapping. You don't automate before identifying. Carl, how many times have we heard, about people implementing a new ITSM tool set, and they're saying once they finish implementing it, they'll go back and document the processes?
Too many times. Too many times.
So basically, they've implemented, I'm not sure with what requirements, but they're documenting the process after the tool has been implemented, which is, you could be agile, right? You can kind of work somewhat in parallel as you're building out the requirements and the process maps, making sure you have technical people involved up front so they can get a sense of how this would be implemented in the tool. You can still be agile. We're not saying you have to, map everything out to the nth degree. But to go in and implement the tool with no process and then go back and map it afterwards, what's the point? Then you need to automate the tool. Then execute. So this is part of the business process management life cycle. So identify, map, automate, execute. So execute is about operating the process. The people the day-to-day people, the process owner, the process manager, the technical specialist, how they operate and manage the process that was implemented. Then there's governance. So that's making sure that as you're operating and managing the process, the metrics are coming back to align those processes with your organizational goals. So you're measuring and you're using all that governance to control the processes. And then finally, you'll improve the processes. And if you take this approach as you're, evolving, let's say, I don't want to pick on ServiceNow, but they are kind of one of the biggest SaaS platforms out there. If you take kind of this business process management approach, so that once you've got the first version out, well, you're executing it, right? So you're getting feedback from the operations folks. You're making sure that the governance is there. You're getting that feedback. So now you can improve, which goes back to mapping and automating, right? Identifying, mapping, and automating. I didn't draw it as a cycle, but it actually is a cycle of continual service improvement. And by managing your processes, you're indirectly managing the tool and making sure that the process documentation is updated, the requirements documentation is updated, and the tool is updated in a structured, governed way as opposed to ad hoc. Very common tool-driven deployments, yeah. One of the things that I think can really help with that is user stories to capture the business perspective. Now, I've looked at some user stories, and I've seen user stories that are nothing more than technical requirements. You'll see as the process owner, I need to configure the notification. I mean, they get to this level of technical detail that kind of misses the why and why. So, as a process owner, I want to make sure the right people are notified and they're not overwhelmed with notifications that creates like snow blindness so that they don't see important things. So I have a business requirement, and that can be implemented by certain notification rules and by certain email messages. But a lot of times I find that people go straight, their user story looks more like a technical requirement than an actual business requirement. And by using user stories to capture the business perspective, you got better alignment with what you're trying to achieve from a process perspective. And then you drive the technical requirements from the user stories. So an example of that is, let's say we have a super simple process. In this example, it's super simple just because of for communication's sake. But we have a process. Let's say it's around expense reporting. So the employee submits an expense form. The manager either approves it or not. If he approves it, it gets submitted for payment, and the employee is reimbursed. So this is your process, right? And obviously, it'd be a little more complex than this. But for every step in your process, you can actually capture multiple user stories. So you can have a user story about, hey, yes, I need a simple way of capturing my expenses and attaching receipts. Now, what's the technical solution for that? Well, maybe it's my iPhone and I can just take a picture of the receipt. You're getting into the technical stuff there of how to do it. But what we want, though, is something super simple that saves time, allows all the expenses to be captured, and just makes it a pleasure for the employee to use. So you can go through your process, capture all the user stories, and then comes the technical requirements, right? So the user story is not the scanned receipts. The user story is the simple and time-saving method, and it could be a little more robust than that. But scanning receipts. I need these fields on the form. We have to recreate. Don't forget to create an expense report number. We have to send the right notifications to people. We have statuses that we have to deal with. So what are the statuses? Is an expense report open, in progress, closed, or maybe maybe it's rejected, approved. So there's all of these technical items that are driven from the user stories. And I don't. One of the first exposures, to a big SaaS implementation that I had was we were invited to sit in on a call, and it was a design workshop. And basically, what happened was the consultant. It wasn't one of our consultants. We were just sort of a fly on the wall. They basically brought up the application and started saying, well, what fields, what values do you want in this dropdown? And they went straight into the technical implementation. What fields do you need to capture? What values do you want in these dropdowns? They were getting down into the configuration of the tool, but they never took a step back and saying, what are we trying to achieve? And user story mapping is one technique for process, business requirements, technical requirements. And I happen to just mock that up here in the Navia tool. So again, for those of you who know us, you know that we have a product that does business process mapping, but it also allows you to capture user stories for use in implementing a tool. So kind of took the same approach here. I have an expense approval process that I built. Oops, got locked out. System timed out. So I have an expense approval process that I built. So the Navia tool allows you to capture a lot of elements about a process, like the description and scope of the process, the goal, the objectives, the different roles. We have an employee, we have a supervisor, we have the accounting team, different systems that you use to support the process, a glossary of terms. You've got your workflow with your inputs, your outputs. You've got your process controls, metrics, policies, and you've got technical specifications. That includes things like the user stories. Now, these user stories around expense submission, manager review, accounting review, notify manager and employee, reimburse employee, these user stories actually came from the process. So you can, so here are, again, very simplified process. So we've got, we've got the expense report in draft where the employee creates the expense. Navia allows you to capture a description of what that activity is. But more importantly, it allows you to capture the user story associated with this step in the process. So I can come in here and say, I've got, oh, I got the wrong one here. I'm sorry, made a little, let me just back out. So, as an employee, I need to be able to submit and track my expense report. The submission will notify my manager to ensure efficient processing of the report. I can put in my acceptance criteria here. I could update the user story, or I can add more user stories to that step in the process. So basically what I did here is created a simple process flow, described each of the steps in the process flow. For each step in the process flow, I have different user stories. So the accounting review, notify manager and employee. I can take a look at those different. Take a look at those different user stories. And then when I'm ready to, begin to communicate this to the business and development teams, I can go into my documents and reports, and I could create, like for example, an executive summary of the process that looks like this. So I have the expense approval process. We got my table of contents. So I've got a description of an overview description of the process. I've got the RACI chart for the process. And all of this was built from the flow diagrams. I've got the workflow for the process, description of the activity, the different steps. I got the RACI values for each step in the process. And then from here, I can also bring up the user stories, where it'll go. So using a document, what we call a document profile, we'll look at all the data that's in Navia and assemble it into a document this, the previous example was the actual process guide. In this example now, more of a user story document. So I can see all of my various user stories. And then to those user stories, I can have the related items, which is the technical requirements. So how do we go about doing that? Well, if I go back to the user stories, so here I have, my expense report submission. I can associate items with that, and those items can be, technical values. So to this user story, I can attach data requirements, tool requirements. What state is the process in at this point? Is it in draft? Is it in progress? What are some of the metrics I might be using that are important to help shape what the reports might look like for the expense report process? What triggers, what email notifications? Do I have any design documentation I want to attach to the user story? So now that I have a set of use, so we have the user stories, these user stories are mapped to the process, and each user story, then you can drive out the technical requirements. And then by producing the documents and reports, you can get a blueprint in essence of your process and your technical design. Anyway, so that's a little bit about the user story mapping. I just wanted to share that. So the way forward. So how do you tame this technical debt? So again, put a process around it, right? So you need to identify and prioritize the existing technical debt. You got to sit down and take account where are the issues, and you can do that through code reviews, through retrospectives, through interviewing the developers, to a variety of ways. What functionality can't we implement because of? So you can use the causes of technical debt and the ways of identifying technical debt to identify what you have. You need to record all this technical debt in a system, ideally link it to the issues that you need to resolve. So it could be in your development tool, if you're using VSTS in a kind of a Microsoft DevOps environment, or if you're using Jira, you can record your technical debt in a system, or it could be in a project management tool. You need to implement mandatory code reviews to catch technical debt early. You also have to ensure adequate test coverage. So this code review test coverage is essential, again, part of your continual improvement process, to make sure that you don't only identify and track, but you're staying on top of the debt as it's being, as you're developing new functionality in the system. You need to measure the impact of technical debt on the organization. And then you need to schedule the remediation of technical debt alongside enhancements and maintenance. It's easy to say, let's push it, we'll deal with that later. We'll deal with it later. We need to get this new, the business wants this, we'll deal with that later. The business wants this, we'll deal with that later. Well, eventually later is going to come back and haunt you, because you're going to get to a point where we're not able to address a business issue because we have too much technical debt. And this cycle, if you will, helps you embed quality over expediency, and then you can embed that into the development lifecycle and just make it part of your process, right? So you work with management to make sure that we allocate time to address technical debt, not only bring out new capability.
Hey, David, Toshi had a comment.
Hey, Toshi. The tricky part of documenting the process requirements is that organizations are not following industry best practices. As a result, there's a gap between them and new solution, which is designed on industry best practice. Process alignment engineering is needed. Yep, you're right. You need to map out your processes, and it is a tricky part because sometimes the tools are done a little bit differently. What I like to say. If you're a simple organization, relatively small and very simple requirements, most of these tools that are out there today, and the modern set of service management tools, you could probably adopt an out-of-the-box. It's probably just as easy for you, through organizational change management, get people to adopt the process that's in the tool. And for some organizations, that makes sense because the requirements aren't overly complex. But as just from the perspective that Carl and I come to this, we tend to work with enterprise-sized clients where nothing is ever that simple. And actually taking the time to sit down and document is critical. And the last thing is take a holistic approach, right? Cultivate a culture that emphasizes the long-term benefits of managing technical debt, encouraging management and team members to balance it with time pressures and feature prioritization. That's a people perspective, the process perspective. Make business process and requirements management a core part of your development lifecycle. Like it should, right? Like we have a template in the Navia tool on software development and management. And requirements is a huge part of that. It's one of the key activities of software development is to have good requirements. You should also adopt standardized software development, ITSM, and project management practices because those are very crucial to mitigating technical debt, identifying and mitigating and tracking. And then you should invest in technical debt tracking systems and modern development tools alongside automated testing to identify technical debt early. So by taking this holistic people, process, and technology approach, combined, with, a cycle of managing your technical debt, and then, just following some of the practices of having a good blueprint and good documentation, you'll put yourself in a much better position to manage technical debt going forward. So that brings us, we're a few minutes over. I apologize for that. We started a little bit late. I don't know if anyone noticed, but we couldn't, when we launched the webinar today, it just decided it didn't want to start. So we're a couple minutes late, so we're a little sorry. I apologize for that. But any questions, comments? Tracy says, I'll tell you what, it's a glorious project when you have a large client with expensive tech debt that openly embraces best practices and has implemented governance for their own people to request anything non-standard custom. Thank you, Tracy. Sounds like a great Christmas present. Happy holidays. Oh, that's Carl. Yeah, well, happy holidays, Carl. Any other comments or questions? All right. Well, this is going to be our obviously last webinar of the year. If you have any questions about our product, check out our website. You can get a free trial up there of the Navia Process Designer, or you can reach out to us at navia.com/contact. We're going to be sending out the webinar recording and slides, and we're also going to be posting it up on our website. Carl and I can stick around for a few minutes. So for those of you who are taking off, I wish you happy holidays, Merry Christmas. And for those of you, I'll just go through some of these comments here. You're welcome, Tracy. Thanks for joining us, John. Thank you, Armin. Thank you, Christina, Robin. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Doesn't look like there's any additional questions at this point in time. Thank you all again, and wonderful holidays. Merry Christmas, and we'll see you all in the new year.
Happy holidays, everyone. Take care.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Terry. Bye, Armin.